Has anybody else seen these charts about household income according to race? Well, I have. I've seen them all over the place. The wealth gap in America is a stark and persistent issue, with black households typically having significantly less wealth than their white counterparts. Even at a time where black wealth is increasing, the racial gap is actually getting wider and wider. In today's video, we will explore the factors contributing to this disparity, examining historical context, systematic discrimination, housing and lending practices, and the role of public policy. Understanding these factors is crucial to addressing and ultimately closing this wealth gap. So we're going to start with the historical context of slavery and its aftermath. The roots of the racial wealth gap in America can be traced back to the institution of slavery. No brainer there. For over 250 years, black people were enslaved and forced to work without compensation, building much of the nation's wealth while being systematically denied the opportunity to accumulate any for themselves. But I'm constantly being reminded slavery ended over 150 years ago, so we should be good, right? Well, you're dead wrong. The abolition of slavery in 1865, which it really didn't end in 1865, was followed by the Black Code and Jim Crow laws, which continued to enforce racial segregation and economic disparity. Obviously, I don't have to deep dive into how slavery held back black people. Hopefully everybody can understand that. So let's look at the policies after slavery ended that have held us back, starting with a little known policy called the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided millions of acres of land to white Americans at little to no cost, enabling them to build wealth through agriculture and property ownership, giving them all a little piece of America. However, black people were largely excluded from this opportunity, either through direct discrimination or through a lack of access to the resources and information needed to claim the land. The Homestead Act, originally signed by Mr. President Lincoln, granted 246 million acres of Western land for pretty much free. Can you even imagine that? Just getting acres and acres of land for free, and all you have to do is tend to it. And by the way, just so you understand, that's close to the landmass of both California and Texas for pretty much free. An individual could literally receive 160 acres of government land by first filing an application, then promising to just improve the land for 5 years, and then just file for the deed of ownership. By 1934, 1.5 million white families benefited from this land giveaway. Since the original Homestead Act was signed during the Civil War, a second Homestead Act, the Southern Homestead Act, was enacted in 1866. In that act, unoccupied Southern land was offered exclusively to African Americans who are now free and loyal white Southerners. But the offer seemed good on paper but proved to be ineffective for several reasons. Some of these reasons include the recently freed slaves obviously didn't have any cash because they've been working for free for the last 250 freaking years, and some people even argue longer than that. Also, to file for an application, it could take possibly several weeks to travel to one of the land offices in each state. And they had to travel through pretty dangerous territory for people that just got out of a civil war to try and claim land that a lot of people didn't want them to have. And that's for slaves who were truly free. There was a significant number of black people that were forced into labor contracts even after slavery ended, meaning they kept working on plantations for years after their freedom. By the time this radical land redistribution had come to an end, black people were left in the dust. Even former Confederate soldiers were able to get land. There were black families that did receive land under the Homestead Act, but the percentage was very, very small. In 2000, it was estimated that 46 million people living in the U.S., about a quarter of the U.S. adult population, were descendants of the original Homestead Act recipients. Although many homesteaders failed, plenty of them were able to either work the land they received or sell it to corporations later on and pass down that wealth. Now let's look at housing discrimination. One of the most significant factors contributing to the wealth gap is housing discrimination. The practice of redlining, which began in the 1930s, involved banks and other institutions refusing to offer mortgages or loans to people living in predominantly black neighborhoods. This prevented many black families from purchasing homes, which for decades has been the primary means of building wealth in America. Redlining especially affected families who migrated to the North and Midwest. These families left the South to escape racism and find better opportunities, but a different type of racism was waiting for them. Redlining was rampant in the Midwest, which explains why some of the biggest wealth and education gaps in the country are found in cities in the Midwest. Now you have black people living in segregated communities that are underserved, be it in education or well-paying jobs. And when strong black neighborhoods and communities popped up, they were often torn down in racist riots. If you haven't seen our video on some historical black towns that were destroyed, catch it up there. Black kids growing up in underserved communities with less opportunities go into lower paying jobs. Those that can even go to college have to borrow more money than their white classmates to go to college. I mean, there's stories about whole communities having to get together to send one person to college. At that point, again, they're already starting behind financially before they even graduate college. And when they finally make it to the workplace, even in higher earning fields, black people often make less money. According to the Economic Policy Institute, black men earn approximately 73% of what white men earn. And black women earn even less at about 65% of what white men earn. First comes college, then home ownership. That's the American dream. Home ownership has been a key component of wealth accumulation in America, but black home ownership rates lag significantly behind those of white Americans. According to the US Census Bureau, as of 2020, about 74% of white Americans own their homes, compared to just 44% of black Americans. So now let's look back at another big policy that contributed to the massive wealth gap we have today. The New Deal of Roosevelt and the GI Bill helped to create the American middle class after World War II. But black Americans, again, were largely excluded from these benefits. The Social Security Act of 1935, for example, excluded domestic and agricultural workers, positions predominantly held by none other than black people at the time. Similarly, discriminatory practices prevented many black veterans from accessing the educational and housing benefits of the GI Bill. This exclusion from the ability to create wealth either via home ownership or a high-paying job means black families have less or no wealth getting passed down from generation to generation.
Income is different from wealth. Right. Wealth is what you own minus what you owe. And even two people working today at most places who are black and white making the same income would, statistically speaking, have very different levels of wealth.
One of the most significant factors in the wealth gap is the lack of inherited wealth among black families. White families are more likely to inherit money, property, and other assets, providing a significant head start in wealth accumulation. So what does the racial wealth gap look like in numbers? According to the Brookings Institute, in 2022, for every $100 in wealth held by white households, black households held only about $15. There is a $240,120 difference in wealth between the median white household and the median black household. The largest gap in wealth growth was in stock equity, which made up nearly 30% of white wealth, but only 4% of black wealth. So I bet you're asking, all right, Jarrett, I see what you're saying. What should we do about this ever-growing racial wealth gap? One proposed solution to addressing the racial wealth gap is that little R word that many Americans just lose their mind over when they hear it. Yep, you got that right, reparations. Reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans. Reparations could take the form of direct payments, investment in black communities, or other measures aimed at compensating for the historical injustices that have contributed to the current wealth disparity. I've done a video on cities that were entertaining some reparation proposals. Make sure to watch that if you haven't yet. Above all, since various policies created and flamed the wealth gap, it's policies that are needed to close it too. Hey, I mean, reparations can be one policy, right? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about reparations. It's always a crazy hot topic. There are so many other things that I would have liked to address in this video, but I could have been here for probably years upon years. There are books and books, some of them maybe I'll leave below, that talk about all the different ways that African Americans or blacks were held back in this country. We didn't even get into how they weren't even allowed to go to school, weren't allowed to read. There are so many things and so much research that you could do. I encourage you all to go and do that. say so much more on this topic. In every single recession, who got hurt the worst? During the Great Depression, did you know that half of African Americans were without work? I just really don't think that most people understand what African Americans went through in this country. In 2008, who was targeted the most for faulty, discriminatory home loans before the 2008 crash? And I'm sure a lot of people would say that it's their fault, but learning about the stock market, learning about home ownership, learning about maintaining your own home comes with experience. And when you have parents before you that didn't own any stocks, or maybe didn't own their first home, with the ending of Jim Crow laws and thinking that blacks were supposed to figure this all out in one person's lifetime, one, maybe two generations, is just crazy to me. So, thanks again. Bye. Ugh.